And one of the highlights of the administration of former President Buhari is the passage of the Finance Act, which introduced several changes to tax laws and supported the revenue generation efforts of the government. In total, 4 Finance Acts have been passed: Finance Act of 2019, that of 2020, 2021, and 2023. The Finance Act 2023 came on much later than the usual cycle experienced with prior Finance Acts, which were signed together with the Annual Appropriation Acts. Through the Financial Act 2023, government appears to be focused on promoting tax equity by cleaning out the prevailing incentive regime in the tax laws. Many provisions offering one form of incentive or another in the extant laws were terminated, thereby exposing taxpayers to potentially higher taxes. While there have been debates on the cost-benefit analysis of various tax waivers and exemptions granted to taxpayers, recent study of tax expenditure in Nigeria shows that the country could potentially have given out over 21.8 trillion naira in waivers and incentives between 2020 and 2023. This might explain the drive of the government to redirect part of such funds to actual collection to boost government revenue. Now, joining us on the news to further espouse this subject is Jibrin Dasun, a tax expert. I want to say good afternoon and welcome to Arise News Now.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
And I want to say this Finance Act of 2023. First question, this is just a simple question. Does it mean that the average Nigerian will be paying more tax from 2023 upwards?
Unfortunately, yes. In fact, companies and individuals should see an increase in their tax liability going forward. There are about 6 changes in the Finance Act that will lead to an increase in the tax liability of companies and individuals. The first is that an import duty of 0.5% is now payable in respect of imports coming outside of Africa.
Yeah.
The intention behind this is that the revenue from this new tax is to go towards funding Nigeria's financial obligations to international bodies such as ECOWAS and the UN and the likes. So that should lead to an increase in the price of imported goods coming from outside of Africa. Secondly, education tax, which was currently 2.5%, has been increased to 3%.
Yes, 3%.
Yeah,
yes.
It is payable by companies and it goes towards funding tertiary education in Nigeria. So that, of course, should lead to an increase in the tax burden of companies. Then, thirdly, there are about 4 incentives which were tied to investments. Those incentives have been deleted. That should reflect an increase in the tax burden of companies, and of course, government revenue will go up. Then fourthly, you have, so previously, when you dispose structures that can be easily removed from land, such as shelters, masts, and masts, VAT was not payable, but Finance Act 2023 has deleted these, has now imposed tax on these items. That should lead to an increase in tax liability for taxpayers who dispose these assets, and of course an increase in government revenue. Then crypto assets too is an interesting area. The Finance Act 2023 has expressly provided that crypto assets will not be subject to capital gains tax. Previously, it wasn't really clear, but it has now been expressly made clear. So going forward, all the crypto transactions will attract capital gains tax.
10%, but that's steep. That's steep.
Very, very steep, 10%. But there's a challenge there because so currently most crypto transactions are P2P.
Yeah.
Secondly, most of the companies behind crypto transactions are based offshore. Of course, the Binance and the rest of them.
Yeah.
Then thirdly, the legal status of crypto assets is still unclear. So it will be interesting to see how government will go about collecting this 10% on crypto transactions from these, given these issues. Then finally, which to be will have the most impact on government revenue is that excise duty is now payable on all services, including telecom services. You will recall that former President Muhammadu Buhari had suspended the 5% extra duty payable on telecom services sometime in March or so this year. But Finance Act 2023 has now provided that excise duty is now payable on all services, including telecom services. President Tinubu is expected to, set the rates of this new tax. So what should happen is that going forward, we should expect Tinubu to set the new rates, and if he does that, that would lead to an increase in the tax liability of taxpayers for all services, in Nigeria. So for me, these are the changes that the Finance Act have introduced that would lead to an increase in the tax revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now looking at it closely, we look at these things, and certainly, first of all, the first question that that actually jumps out to me is the fact that you said it looks like 21 trillion naira, more than 21 trillion naira were waived by the former government.
Correct.
What was the logic and the wisdom behind doing that this government has seen? Because certainly a lot of things, the cost of living has actually gone up.
Correct.
And a lot of people will be expecting that if cost of living actually goes up, you try to mitigate by maybe reducing the tax burden on the individual. But the cost of living is going up, and also taxation is also going up heavily. But talk to us, before we come to that particular question, that's the second part of the question. Talk to us, what was the wisdom behind several of these waivers that were given in the previous government between 2020 and 2023?
So the logic was that some areas were underfunded, i.e., there was no investment in some areas of the economy, such as in the rural areas. Companies, would not want to go.
Or maybe let me try to specify.
Okay.
Let's start with the telecoms.
Okay.
Because Issa Pantami said that there must be a waiver, and the president's words stands regardless of what the act actually says. Let's start from there.
So for the tax payable on telecom services, the minister made an argument that it would increase the cost of procuring that service in Nigeria, which is valid. But on the other hand, government also needs to raise revenue to fund the deficits. As you recall, about 10 trillion naira is the deficit between in the last budget. So there's this huge disparity in tax revenue vis-a-vis the expenditure of government. So government has been looking for several ways to raise revenue. They tried with the VAT increase, that the rate so it will move from 5% to 7.5%, but that seems to have it's still not sufficient to fund the deficit. So it appears that the intention is to now find other ways of increasing the VAT rates without it being obvious, and that's why they've coming through the excise duty payable on telecom services. So it's an indirect way of effectively increasing VAT to fund the deficit. But it will be interesting to see. I agree with you to see how the populace will react to this, because of course, given the fuel subsidy removal, the imminent increase in tariff for electricity, I don't expect that taxpayers will find this very funny, because it would of course lead to an increase in the in the cost of procuring goods and services. So I agree with you. It's a balancing act between trying to shop revenue and also trying to not to overburden the taxpayers with the tax liability that comes from these new taxes.
We know that of course one of the major ways you actually increase revenue as a government is taxation. But a lot of people have questioned. If you just touched on that, but let's try to elucidate on that. A lot of people have questioned the timing. And a lot of people have also questioned the sectors also. Because some of these sectors directly or probably indirectly would impact the average citizen. Because when you talk about some of the company tax and the rest of them and how the trickle effects would actually come to the average man, you look at this and say that, isn't this too much for the average Nigerian to shoulder and to actually carry on at this moment in time, when you put into context the fact that the tariff on electricity, we are hearing that from the 1st of July will actually shoot up, when we also hear that when we've actually seen the impact of the removal of fuel subsidy?
No, I agree with you 100%. So interestingly, what the government has been trying to do to raise revenue is to focus on taxpayers who have been compliant. So they just go to them, increase the rates, delete incentives that they've been enjoying to try and get more revenue. But it's been argued that there are low-hanging fruits that the government can go after to raise revenue without overburdening the taxpayers. So for example, the informal sector doesn't pay VAT, unfortunately, in Nigeria. So that's an avenue that, so that you have all of your, all the Instagram vendors who do a lot of transactions and they don't pay VAT. Those are avenues that the government can go after to get taxes. But unfortunately, those sectors have been ignored. That's the first sector that's been ignored, and they've been focusing on the few taxpayers who have been paying taxes, trying to get more taxes out of them. And that, of course, will lead to the blowback that the taxpayers expect. So government needs to be creative. Look for for areas where people have not been paying taxes, go after those areas, as against focusing on the few taxpayers who pay those taxes.
That's my exact point, because according to reports out there, they said that about a total of 23,141 defaulters owe 254 billion naira in back taxes and tax liabilities. Why don't we go after those who don't pay their taxes? Because there's some people that probably escape the tax nets completely. There are quite a number of people, we know that escape the tax nets completely. Why don't we go after those people and those defaulters as against probably raising the tax at this point in time?
No, I agree with you. I would say maybe there are about, I don't know, two reasons come to mind. One, I would say maybe the political will of the government, and I would say maybe they're not very creative. Maybe I'll put it that way. Because, so for example, sometime in the past, Fowler, who was the former chairman of the FIRS, went after the bank accounts of Nigerians. There's a threshold. If you earn income above a particular threshold and you don't file tax returns, they will assess you to pay taxes. Now, for some reason, they didn't follow through with that. But if you ask me, it's an effective way to fish out the Nigerians who don't pay taxes, because you have BVN, which tracks all of your accounts, and of course, you can then feed that into, compare that with the tax database, and then you see the defaulters. But unfortunately, that policy was stopped, and I don't know why they haven't continued that. But if you ask me, I agree with you. There's that political will, but of course, it's also very creative too.
All right.
They can find ways to get more revenue.
All right. I want to say thank you very much for your time today and expounding on this Finance Act 2023. Certainly, we've not heard the last of this.
Definitely.
We've not heard the last of this. Thank you for your time here on Arise News Now.